Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're learning optional chaining and Nullish Coalescing. We'll learn what they are and why they matter in JavaScript. I also have posted a link in the description to my website where you can follow along with this tutorial. And if you find it helpful, be sure to like and subscribe. I post on a regular basis JavaScript tutorials every week. Okay, so let's go over optional chaining and Nullish Coalescing. First, with optional chaining, essentially what it is it allows you to safely access deeply nested properties without throwing an error if part of the chain is null or undefined. So we're going to go into why that matters, but first let's go ahead and understand how this works. Here on the right hand side, we have optional chaining example, and we have an object that's assigned to user. And normally when you want to access properties or methods, you use dot notation like so, for instance, and you'll see that we get back Toronto, the city. Now, sometimes properties or methods might not exist and you might not know, and it's uncertain. And so that's when optional chaining comes into play. And so if we take a look at this further, let's say we have a second user with an object of just name. So we don't have city. And so what happens is if you try to access this, you're going to get a type error. And the problem with this is it stops the rest of your code from running. So even if we were to add this line, which is the correct line, which uses optional chaining, it doesn't run. And that's because we get that type error. And so in order to peacefully access and see if you can access a property or method, you can use optional chaining instead. And the only difference is you're going to add a question mark in front of the period. And when you run this, you're going to get back undefined, so it doesn't exist. In this case, it's true, just to show you that it is equivalent to undefined here. Let's look at another example so we can understand this a bit further. And here in example 2, we have a API response that has some data about a user. And we're trying to access the bio within the profile, but that doesn't exist. It's set to null. And so if we were to run this, we were to store this in a variable of bio. So we have response.data.user.profile, and then .bio, which doesn't exist. We get a type error again. So it's causing everything to crash. And so in order to peacefully resolve this, instead we're going to use optional chaining. And so we go ahead and run this. We get back true that bio is equivalent to undefined. So that's optional chaining and why it's useful. And again, it's just adding a question mark when you're accessing properties or methods in front of the period. But let's look at nullish coalescing. And with nullish coalescing, let's look at what this is. It's similar to the OR operator. So you might have been familiar with the AND operator, OR operator, the NOT operator. Well, nullish is two question marks, whereas the OR operator is the two vertical lines. But the difference between them is that nullish coalescing only is falsy if it is null or undefined. And so OR also includes falsy values like 0 or empty strings or even false, but nullish coalescing is a bit more reserved. And so that can be beneficial from time to time when you actually need those values of 0 or empty string or even false, and you don't want the program to not register it. And so we can look at this example, number 3 here. We have nullish coalescing. And this is just to get you started, and then we're going to look at more of a practical example. But let's look at this basic example here. And so what's happening here is we have two variables, input 1 and input 2. We're using the OR operator or also nullish coalescing with the two question marks. So input 1 is either going to be empty string or default, and input 2 is going to be empty string or default. But what happens is if we were to run this, only input 1 is default, and input 2 is the empty string. And so that's because we're using nullish coalescing, and that accounts for empty strings. And it's only looking for if input 2 was null or undefined. So we can now look at this to a practical degree with this example below. And it's essentially a comparison between when you would use when you would use the OR operator and when you would use Nullish Coalescing. And here we have user, it's an object. And we're essentially saying for users, if they were to, log into somewhere, if they don't have a username, then we want them to be assigned the username of guest. So that's what's taking place here. Now, in this case, for this username Sam, they accidentally have an empty string for their username, which is not very useful. And so if we were to run this, we would get back username guest because we're using the OR operator here. If we were to change this to two question marks, we get back username empty, an empty string, which is not very beneficial. That was a mistake. And so using the OR operator in this case is more useful. On the flip side, let's say we have a user settings panel and the user is able to customize their theme, how many items they want per page, and they want to show the sidebar, true or false. What we could do instead, because false and 0 are actually important values to us, we want to use Nullish Coalescing. And so here we have items per page assigned to users.settings items per page. We have show sidebar, user settings.show sidebar, Nullish Coalescing true. And if we were to run this, we would get back, go ahead and console this out. We would get back items per page 0 because that was specified as their preference, and show sidebar false, that they don't want the sidebar showing. The problem with using just the OR operator is those values wouldn't be recognized. And we see that here. We get back items per page 10, that's the default, the fallback value, and then true is the fallback value. But in this case, that is not what we want, and so it's more optimal to use Nullish Coalescing in this example. Let's recap what we learned. Optional chaining lets you safely access nested properties and therefore no crashes if something's missing. You can use it when a value might not exist, but if you're sure a value will always be present, there's no need to use it as you can end up hiding bugs in your code. Nullish Coalescing gives you fallback values only when a value is null or undefined. It's more focused than the OR operator, which treats all falsy values as missing. This makes your code safer, cleaner, and easier to read, especially when working with APIs or user inputs.